All right, let's bring Frank in, get these questions his way. A lot of Phillies questions. Frank, we had the conversation beforehand about how much, connection with this team there is right now. Last year it was, well, they don't have a star, and I don't really believe in them. And yet they were better at this time last year, record-wise, than they are right now. But how about in your world, in what you do, the Phillies mailbag, interaction, getting questions, all that kind of stuff? Do you feel that people are more invested or more interacting or more passionate about this team?
I think that's fair to say, because this year they're angry during this little swoon. At the end of last year, everybody said, oh, well, they weren't meant to be anyway. But now they seem to have a closer eye on the team. I think they see that there's still a lot of talent here, and I think that's what's frustrating the fans, is that they have a bunch of talent. They're not winning. Some of the holes are obvious to the fans, and they really want to see something happen with this team, and they want them to win. So they want to enjoy them. They bought tickets for this season. A lot of them haven't used them all yet, so they're pretty much emotionally invested, and they've even invested their literal money in this Philly season. So I think this year they are much more tuned in.
What do you make of yesterday, Klintak having to come out and basically say the manager's not going anywhere, and Anthony adds to the question. He wants to know, why haven't the hitting coach and the pitching coach been fired? Well, they're not going anywhere either, apparently.
Yeah, well, let's talk Gabe Kapler first. I don't think that the general manager gains anything by saying, oh, yeah, our manager is doing a great job, maybe I'll fire him. Usually you get a vote of confidence. And let's face it, a lot of the problems with this Phillies roster are Klintak's own doing, or lack of addressing some of the key needs here. We've talked many times about how the Phillies went into 2019 with the same exact starting rotation they ended 2018 with, even though you knew down the stretch there were a number of problems. And it really was a starting rotation that kind of fell off the face of the earth last year that was mostly responsible for that swoon down the stretch. So there is some culpability there for the construction of the roster. And as you guys were saying a lot this show so far, a lot of this era of baseball, the manager and GM are like-minded, and Matt Klintak picked his general manager because there's an organizational philosophy, and that's philosophy aligned. So really would not be the manager's fault. The manager of this day and age is a lot about coaxing egos and managing the people more than it is managing the games. And that philosophy sort of established this, and really the day-to-day minding the egos is kind of the manager's job at this point. Now, as we look at the coaches, this question specifically asked about John Maley and Chris Young. If you look at John Maley and you look at some of the Phillies' successes this year, are you to say that John Maley's poor performance is what turned Scott Kingery around, from somebody who got off to a rocky start in the major leagues and then all of a sudden this year hitting .333, or does he get credit for that? And on the converse, the players that are holdovers from that era, even the Michael Francos, Cesar Hernandez, and Odubel Herrera, all who have certain inconsistencies in their game. They had those before he got there. They have these same inconsistencies now. Is he to be blamed for those situations? So really I think that if you're going to look at the greater picture here, you're going to see some successes in there and some things that maybe aren't Maley's fault. And, John Maley, he was the one who got hired as the Cubs hitting coach when Joe Maddon joined the team, and they took over a team that was a last-place team, and they took them to the World Series and won it. So John Maley has the World Series ring, so he had a little bit of credibility there in my mind. And, Chris Young, kind of the opposite. He's not the established person in the league, but he was definitely a hot prospect among other organizations. And the Phillies got a lot of calls this past winter trying to interview Chris Young, then the Phillies' assistant pitching coach, to be their pitching coach for the other organizations. And the Phillies basically had to swallow hard and say, okay, well, we liked Rick Kranitz. We did invite him back. But if the long-term answer here is going to be Chris Young, we need to move on from Kranitz now just to keep Chris Young. And that's what they did. And Kranitz went to the Atlanta Braves of all teams, who happened to be one of the teams who was trying to hire Chris Young away. So, and the same thing there. Can you blame him for all the injuries? Can you blame Chris Young for the starting rotation being what what it was last year when it was under Rick Kranitz, and we knew that it wasn't really that well equipped to compete. So if you take the bad with the good and realize that some of these things are problems of yesteryear, it's really kind of hard to blame both of them for the team's struggles.
Frank, before I even ask you about Alec Boehm and Brandon's question about whether or not he's coming to the Phillies, I want to ask you kind of a personal question about your observations being a reporter covering the Phillies, right, and seeing their process for the last few years, and also talking to fans and understanding how they're viewing the development of the baseball team. Do you feel like a lot of fans have a tough time digesting what's going on from an analytics and front office standpoint, because analytics themselves are very difficult to understand with your VORPs and your BABIPs and your all this terminology that nobody used 10 years ago? Or do you think that part of the disconnect might be because while baseball was really making this really cool, I mean, it's been a gradual shift, but I'd say from 2013 to 2017, 18, you saw some really dramatic shifts in how the Astros, the Rays, and other teams, the Red Sox, went about their business and analytics. And that's a time where the Phillies were going through their lean years, and I think a lot of fans checked out. It seems like to me that a lot of people don't even realize that how powerful general managers have become, but it's been going on for several years. So what do you think is more disconnecting? Just the whole concept of analytics and all the terminology, or just the fact that the Phillies were going through lean years while the rest of baseball was modernizing?
I think that I think fans should actually kind of remember that the Phillies were perhaps one of the first analytics teams. If you go way back to 1993, it was kind of new that a team would construct a lineup where they had platoons in both right field and left field. If you remember, you'd have Eisenreich and Wes Chamberlain in right field, and then left field was Peter Cavilla, Bill Thompson, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. So
they were kind of one of the first to do it, but nobody called it that. It wasn't seen as the next trend.
Right.
People are out in the working world. They're many industries. They all want the data analytics people, and maybe there's just a certain element of people that have never taken the time to look at it, or maybe even they feel threatened by it. People don't like change, and people are used to seeing this game played a certain way, and they're used to the days where to bring back some recent memory. As you go back to like 2003, even you'd have the leadoff hitter get a walk, and then somebody used like your prototypical number 2 hitter like Placido Polanco would hit him over to second base, and you hope that the third hitter would hit a single. It's been a gradual shift. The Phillies haven't only discussed it until this current regime took over. So I think it's still very, very new in their minds. A lot of people don't understand it, and maybe in their day-to-day lives too, they don't understand it in their companies as things are becoming more about data analysis. And even if you look at the academic degrees out there, people are in all fields offering courses in data analytics. So it's the wave of the future. Numbers don't lie. We're in the era of big data, and really it's just about how to use it.
Right. As Brandon asked, and we heard Matt Klentak say yesterday that it's up to this current roster really to get it done before they go out and make moves from the outside. But Brandon wants to know if Alec Boehm might be coming to the Phillies this year or next, or maybe anybody from the farm system that might help out.
Yeah, so Alec Boehm is the Phillies' top prospect. He's only 4 games in Reading. He hit his first home run just 2 nights ago. Last night, Reading got no hit by the Trenton Thunder, actually. So Alec Boehm is now 2 steps away from the major leagues. But I think that because he has risen so rapidly through the system, he got drafted in 2018, reports to the rookie league, maybe spends a couple of weeks worth of time there, goes to Williamsport when the short season opens, and then this year he went from Lakewood to Clearwater to Reading, and that's a lot of moving early on. Now the reason for that is he's a college draftee, and he's a little bit further ahead from somebody who might have been drafted out of high school. So he is perhaps a little further along. But I think he's going to have to – I'm not going to rule out the possibility that he could end up on the Phillies at some point this season, but a lot's going to have to happen. I fully expect the Phillies to acquire some players before the July 31st trade deadline. Even Gabe Kapler himself has said he'd be surprised if Jay Bruce was the last addition on this team. And then, you'll add some other guys into the mix, and then he still has to put together a decent-sized body of work at Double-A to show he's ready to move from there. Now, a lot of players have skipped over AAA. Chase Utley skipped over AAA. The AA level of competition is seen as where a lot of the really good prospects in baseball are. But another thing that might get in his way, even if he has a good year, is that this September rosters are not going to expand to 40 like the Phillies had 40 on their active roster last year. They're going to expand to 28 players, which means if the Phillies are going to add any extra players, they're probably adding a third catcher, and that's probably Dave Guillon, who is playing pretty well at AAA. They're going to probably add another reliever, and they're probably going to add another bench bat. I mean, that's probably where those three slots are going to go. So it probably takes a couple injuries after the July 31st trade deadline when they sort of rebuilt their roster for them to have to consider digging that deep into the system, even if he is playing well. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I would say it's unlikely at this point. I mean, Adam Haseley made that jump kind of out of necessity. Will be interesting to see what happens with Adam Haseley. Even he started last night in that Reading game, and Trenton yesterday went hitless like the rest of the team. But he should be ready to be activated soon. What they do with him remains to be seen. But out of the farm system, there's not a whole lot of prospects sort of knocking on the immediate door. Haseley would be the closest thing, but Bohm is probably still a bit away. He needs to put together a good body of work, and a few other things have to happen. Because let's face it, Adam Haseley was not supposed to be here either. But with all that happened to the Phillies, here he is.
All right, Frank, I like this game, and one of our listeners asked this question. John wants to know, if you can have a do-over of the 4 top 10 draft picks, you were really bad for a long time, so you got a lot of high cracks. I mean, the Sixers got Embiid, they got Simmons. The Phillies don't have much to show for their ineptitude. So which players, we always like to say, oh, you could have had that guy. Are there any of those in those top 4 top 10 picks, those 4 top 10 picks?
All right, so the first one is Alec Bohm, who we were just talking about a moment ago. I think he's a very good prospect. He's the Phillies' top prospect by most accounts, so he's decent. Adam Haseley looks pretty good. He's the year before that. He seems like a decent prospect. He made the major leagues. He already has a game-winning hit under his belt. That seems to be okay so far. So they're probably the two names that you're thinking of there are Mickey Moniak in 2016, first overall, and the previous year, Cornelius Randolph. If you look at just those 4 names, it seems like Cornelius Randolph is the one that's not so wonderful. But, the Phillies, they picked 10th that year in the draft. So he was a top 10 pick number 10. And, I pulled up Todd Zalecki's article from MLB.com at the time, and he basically says, Randolph has drawn comparisons with Tony Gwynn, but time will tell. Well, been a while. He's hitting more like Tony Gwynn Jr. than his father. But, I don't think the Phillies necessarily missed out in that draft. I was looking to, I pulled up the whole 2015 draft. I saw who was picked ahead of him, and of course there were a lot of great names: Dansby Swanson, Alex Bregman, Kyle Tucker, Andrew Benintendi, Ian Happ. All these guys are very good major leaguers right now. And if you look below him in the first round of that draft, the only name that really sticks out is Mike Soroka, who is the Atlanta Braves starter, who got picked 28th. And
so the Phillies did a bad job of tanking that year. They should have lost a few more games and picked about 3 slots higher.
Yeah, that's a great point. But you know what the Phillies did do in that draft? The Phillies drafted somebody in the second round named Scott Kingery. So it's kind of hard to really fault them for that particular draft pick. If you look at 2016, Moniak, he kind of got off to a slow start, but, he was a high schooler when he got drafted, and you kind of expected him to take a while. 2016, that there was really no big slam dunk name in that draft like there are in some years. So they started to go with Moniak, first overall. The only one really in that draft making any type of impact right now is the second pick overall, and that would be Nick Senzel, who is with the Cincinnati Reds. He's the starting third baseman for the Cincinnati Reds. He's starting to make a nice impact. He's having a decent season. I think he's batting 271.
There was a lot of hype around him. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that would be the one name that you would say, well, maybe they could have grabbed him instead. But it still needs to play out a little bit more because Senzel was a college player when the Cincinnati Reds drafted him. Moniak still has some more time to grow before that, and he was just named a AA Eastern League All-Star for the Phillies. So We'll see where Mickey Moniak goes. So I think it's kind of too early to say that anything's a real bust. I mean, I think they did what they could in 2015. Scott Kingery is not too shabby, to get as your number 2, your second round pick. And we'll see where Moniak goes. But I think we see with Hastley and Bohm, they drafted older players on purpose to bring them along a little bit further. And it seems like they did a good job drafting those players too.
Frank's Phillies Mailbag every Tuesday. You can get it right now at 973ESPN.com. Send your weekly questions to Frank Klose. That's Frank Klose with a K. And we'll answer them right here on the Sports Bash. Frank Klose, like all guests, appeared by the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, guys.